Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this session of Cut the Crop. And today we have an overseas speaker who's been doing a round of workshops that FAR and A Lighter Touch have been working jointly on. His name's Paul Horne. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Yeah, from Melbourne in Australia. And Paul is an IPM expert. And maybe before we start talking about IPM, just tell us a little bit about your background and the company that you, that you actually run. Yeah.
So it's a very small company, and we set it up about 28 years ago. And we don't sell any products. The aim of the company is to help farmers to control pests with minimal use of pesticides. So we've been doing that in a whole range of different crops across Australia mainly, but also overseas occasionally, including New Zealand.
So your background is in entomology?
Yes, I'm an entomologist. And so we concentrate on invertebrate pests. So not just insects, we also cover things like mites, slugs, but we don't go into diseases or, weeds.
So, we use the term in New Zealand a lot, Integrated Pest Management. And of course, when we use that term, the pest definition includes both insects and diseases. But when you're talking about IPM, you are specifically talking about the insect side of things.
Yeah, we stick to the invertebrates because that's what we know. Yeah. And that obviously the diseases are part of it. Mm-hmm. Where the overlap comes in, where we do get involved, is where some fungicides can impact beneficial species.
Yes.
And many don't. But we look at the impact of fungicides on beneficials as well.
Yeah. So let's just talk about, when you're talking about IPM, what you mean and what are the key strategies? And probably really importantly, what is the driver? What do you think are the drivers that are likely to support adoption and uptake by IPM by growers?
Well, a definition of IPM, I guess, from our point of view, is just trying to integrate all of the compatible control measures that there are. So that would be using pesticides, but the pesticides that are compatible with biological control agents, and then also using cultural controls, which can either reduce pest impact or increase beneficial insect capacity. Mm-hmm. So that's how we look at it. The drivers for it, they're many and varied. A lot of people, unfortunately, come to us when there's a crisis, and that could be where pesticides get withdrawn, but more commonly it's where there's insecticide-resistant pests that have to be dealt with.
Yes, and so it's sort of the pesticides aren't working as well, and people are then saying, what do I do?
That's right, yeah. If people have a pesticide-based strategy and the pesticides stop working, obviously they need to do something different.
So I guess if we just talk about let's talk about the cultural side first, because I actually think that this is something that a lot of growers don't necessarily fully understand, the relationship between the cultural practices, the management practices, and how they can impact natural predators and parasites that are out there. So, and maybe they're not taking advantage of some of the cultural management practices as much as they could.
Yeah, the cultural practices are anything that the farmer does that they're in control of, that can impact pests and beneficials. So some of the, and they are many, many and varied, but some of the more obvious ones would be things like weed control, stubble retention, minimum tillage. These things all have an impact. And as far as how you help control slugs, for instance, one of the most simplest things is time of planting. If you plant later and it's colder, the plant sits in the cotyledon stage for longer, and so the same number of slugs per square metre do more damage than they would have if the plant was growing rapidly if it was planted a little bit earlier. So, irrigation, nutrition, they're things that are all done probably for other reasons, but they have a big impact on pests and beneficials as well.
Yeah, and I guess it's that balance between implementing that cultural practice because it allows you to either manage, the nutrition of your crop or the yield that you're going to get versus the positive or negative impact it might have on beneficials. So you really do have to understand the interaction in order to be able to make an informed decision.
Yes, that's right. They're not all compatible. So control of slugs could involve tillage and burning, but that will impact the resident beneficials in the paddock. So the farmer has to weigh up which is more important and what are they trying to do.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've used the term predators and parasites. Just tell us the difference between those two different types of biocontrol.
Yeah. So there's actually three. There's the 3 Ps. So there's predators, parasitoids, and pathogens. So in my talks, I concentrate on the first two. Yeah. So predators are things that just walk up and eat their prey. And so they're like the lions. And the results are obvious immediately and they can be seen. But parasitoids are often underestimated because the parasites live inside the body of their host, and so they're often hidden, and so they can't be seen easily, and so people don't know they're there until they take over the body of the host. So things like aphid parasites, you can't see them until it forms a cocoon and emerges as an adult wasp.
Yeah. And what about the pathogens? So
the pathogens, there are naturally occurring viruses, fungi, bacteria that kill insects. We do see them, and in some cases, especially where it's a little bit more humid or moist, some of the fungal pathogens are, quite commonly found. But some of these are now being formulated into pesticides, and so you can get viruses that are formulated for caterpillars, bacteria. Yeah, so they'll probably that'll increase in the future. There'll be more and more products, I think, that are based on those pathogens.
Yeah, but then that'll be a company selling a product as opposed to a grower managing the crop to, to stimulate naturally occurring.
Yes.
Sort of predators and parasites.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I think the predators and parasites are things that the farmer can encourage, but the pathogens will be most likely something that will be bought.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, there are a number of high-profile pests that are common to both New Zealand and Australia, where there are effective biologicals. Can you just maybe give us a few examples where natural biological control, you've been able to see good results in the field when you have been introducing the concept to growers?
Yeah, some of the most abundant and impactful predators that we have are hoverflies and brown lacewings, and also parasitic wasps. And so parasitic wasps for aphid control, it's easy to see them when they reach that pupal stage, and I think a lot of people do recognise the parasites and their importance. Ladybirds are things that are easy to see and well recognised. They're usually only of particular value if there's a lot of aphids. They're good at cleaning up a out of control population of pests. Mm-hmm. But the brown lacewings, hoverflies, they're often unseen, but their numbers through southern Australia and the cropping areas I've seen in New Zealand, they're incredibly abundant, and they definitely have an impact on the pest species.
So is it easy for growers to go out into their paddock and be able to identify these biological control agents?
it's if they know what they're looking for, they can find them.
Yeah.
But looking for insect eggs isn't something that people often do. But if they're shown how to do it, they're quite easy to find. Monitoring for them can be difficult in the looking out in a paddock if it's cold and wet. It's hard to find small insects, but with a little bit of training, people can do it, and they do.
And that's what your company does. Does it work with groups of growers and shows them how to identify them? And is there information out there about thresholds that, if you have a certain amount of these beneficials that you could then not put on an insecticide spray?
So certainly what our company does more and more is to demonstrate how IPM works and what to look for and how to make a decision. And we often work with agronomists, advisors, not just farmers, but we work with different groups. The second part of your question was how to rely on it or what sort of thresholds.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
Like you might go out and you might see that you've got some beneficials, but they may not be at a population density that it's actually going to deliver any pest control.
Yeah. So in our experience, we don't usually use a rigid threshold. So thresholds work particularly well in pesticide-based programs where there's no beneficials. And so if you've got this many pests, then that means this much damage.
Yeah.
But if I could give you an example, let's say we've got 10 aphids and no beneficials, well, probably next week you'll have an out-of-control aphid population. But if you've got 10 aphids, 2 ladybirds and 1 hoverfly, well, next week you probably won't have any aphids.
Okay.
So we look at trends rather than absolute thresholds. So if on week 1 we found those 10 aphids and 1 mummified one, we'd look next week and hopefully find some more mummified ones and less aphids. But we'd look at the absolute number and the trend that's going on. So we would look for, are we winning or is it things getting worse? Do we need to intervene? So unfortunately, we don't have a simple threshold, which is a number, but we look at the trends.
But how does a grower then develop that level of experience to be able to make those judgment calls?
We often encourage people to just trial a different approach on one paddock or even a part of a paddock. So if their routine would be to spray, let's say, something for aphids, maybe leave that off on a section of the paddock and then compare what's going on in that section with the treated section. And so they can build experience. All right, if we do that, and we can rely on this level of beneficials. It's very difficult when we're looking at percentage parasitism. So let's say we have 80% parasitism. That could be well and truly enough if the population of the pest is low. But if the population is really high, the 20% that's unparasitized could still do a lot of damage. So
it's a journey then. It's sort of like where you have to actually be out in your own farm, trying things and gaining your own personal experience, or your advisor coming in and having experience of what's happening and what it means in your region with your environmental conditions and your crop system.
Yes, I think that's right. And advisors that are looking on multiple farms, that if they can gain that experience, they can get a good picture of what's going on through the district.
But growers being very, very busy, they're not going to like the fact that they have to, it's going to take a lot more time and effort than going to the chem shed and putting on an insecticide. So how do you encourage growers to do, because I've lived this, because I've worked in this space. How do you encourage growers to proactively move to IPM when they're not in a crisis and the chemicals seem to be working okay?
So the driver for doing this, is different for different people. But if growers are interested in sustainability and controlling pests in a different way. So if, for example, some of the pesticides we use currently aren't available for whatever reason, or they don't work, I think it's better to be prepared for that before there's a crisis. And so the growers that we've worked with in a whole range of crops, if they're willing to try it on one paddock, and they'll actually, the first steps are the hardest and the most worrying because it's something different. But once people have adopted IPM, it's actually not that hard, and we don't have to look for lots and lots of different things. There's probably, like if it was cereals, we're looking for aphids, we're looking for lacewings, maybe hoverflies, and those three things are quite easy to see, but you're only worried about them for a certain time as well. It's not that you have to go out there every week for the entire year.
Yeah.
It's just at key times. So the savings, I think, in the long run would be worth it.
Yeah. And I think a key value proposition is that if you are not using as many insecticides, you're keeping those insecticides performing for longer because you're delaying, resistance building up.
Yes, and that's something that some of the multinational chemical companies recognise and promote IPM in their sales. They don't want pesticides to be overused and then lost quickly. And the valuable ones that are selective, we don't want to lose those either.
Yeah. And I guess compatibility of the chemical with the biological is a key component, in the sense that if growers still want to have a fairly intensive insecticide sort of regime, they should be using insecticides that are as compatible with the beneficials as possible. How can they find out whether the chemicals that they're putting on are relatively harmless to the biologicals? I mean, if I look at a lot of insecticide product labels, some of them do talk about compatibility with beneficials, but a lot of them don't.
No, so there's various websites that people can access freely, and they have side effects guides. Mm-hmm. So in the talks we've given, we've nominated a couple of those websites.
Yeah.
Some of them are produced by biological control producing companies. They produce predators and parasites for sale. And so if people buy those, you don't want to just then spray something that kills them. Yeah. So there's actually quite a lot of information. Not all of it is for the specific species that we have here or in Australia, but they would talk about the impact on lacewings or ladybirds or parasitic wasps. And so these charts, they're not an absolute guarantee that these things are safe, but they offer a relative guide, one product versus another. But it's the testing is almost endless, that you could do.
Well, it's right, the combinations.
Yes, yeah. And also, the life stages, the impact of pesticides on different life stages of the same insect could be very different. The impact might be sublethal, not acute. So all the insects could be alive, and so your test would apparently show totally safe.
Yeah.
But then they might not lay as many eggs or live as long. And so the impact is there, but it's not up front. And similarly, in our test, they're often much more serious. We call them the worst case scenario. So if something is safe in our test, we can be pretty sure it's safe in the outdoors.
Yeah.
If it's not safe in our test, doesn't mean it's necessarily unsafe outside, because ultraviolet degradation, volatility, can really impact the results. So all of these sites are just to give you a relative guide to a set of lab tests that can tell you this one is probably safer than this one on this species.
Yeah. And so again, it's a matter of growers doing a little bit of background, sort of searching to find information. Now, at the workshop that I went to in Ashburton, you did put up sort of the picture of a book that you had written on IPM, but you said it wasn't available anymore. But I mean, is there good resources available that growers can Google and find good resources that will allow them to start this journey? Or do you really think that they need to be getting in like an advisor who knows how to do this and actually teaches them?
I'm a bit biased, I suppose.
Well, I know, and so we'll assume that you've got your company hat on here.
So those books that I showed, the reason I showed them was because I wanted people to see that IPM was something that was applicable to cropping, and so the book that I showed had case studies from Australia where farmers and agronomists had made the change from using regular broad-spectrum insecticides to using an IPM approach. I think those books they're not available in hard copies, but they're available as e-books, I think.
Okay, yeah.
So there's a massive amount of information out there, but filtering through it is often quite difficult. So we believe in our little company that on-farm demonstrations are the best way. If a willing farmer and advisor want to try something different, we can help them. And so we usually do that for one season, and very little is needed in season 2, and after that we're not needed at all. But the first step is the hardest, and that's where people, if they have some background reading, that's good, but the hard bit is actually putting it into practice and implementing it.
I know FAR developed a little bit of an IPM resource back in the mid-90s. And it was very similar to what you talk about, showing growers how to identify the beneficials and go out and monitor them. And we did a little bit of a compatibility thing with chemicals. And we got relatively little adoption and uptake. And I guess that was just because, at that time, there just was not the driver there or the recognition of the value that it could bring so far. And I think a lot of the other levy organisations like, the vegetable industry and horticulture are going to start reintroducing some of these resources and allocating time. And that we've got, our aphid chat and we do the aphid monitoring. So I think we're at that time where insecticide resistance, fungicide resistance, and herbicide resistance are all much more obvious to the growers. And I think they're much more aware of how important it is to keep the ones that we've got still working. And the best way to do that is to integrate with other ways of managing the pests. So I think we're probably at the right time now to try and take out the concept of IPM. You did yesterday, you did give an example, though, of situations where applying an insecticide actually made the situation worse. Just talk through that example, because it was quite an extreme example. And I think it did people did sort of go, wow, that's crazy. How could that have happened?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive that applying an insecticide actually makes pest problems worse. And obviously that's not the case with all insecticides. It's where a broad spectrum insecticide is applied to a crop, perhaps for a particular pest, and it may or may not kill that pest, but if it kills a whole lot of predators and parasites of a range of things, then you can flare another pest. So we see this a lot. And in horticulture, two-spotted mite and thrips are usually secondary pests. Whitefly also, sometimes aphids. And so if a farmer applies a broad-spectrum insecticide for a caterpillar, he might kill the caterpillar and do the job, but it kills all the things that control the mites, the aphids and the whitefly. And so all these secondary pests become worse than they were in the first place. And
then the grower feels that they need to come in with another insecticide to control them.
That's right.
And you get into this sort of vicious circle. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I suppose if I'm a grower and I'm thinking, right, okay, I've really got to start thinking about this, what's the first step to take? Because it might feel all a little bit overwhelming.
I think there are resources available. If growers want to find out, is there another way? Can they do it? And then get some advisors that are willing to help them make the change.
And just do it on a small bit of your farm to begin with. Yeah. Don't try and just go straight over to an IPM system.
No, one of the slides I showed yesterday was one of the comments we often hear is we tried IPM and it didn't work. And to me, probably in most cases, people didn't try IPM. They maybe tried stopping spraying insecticides altogether or substitute it with something else. But hopefully what I showed yesterday was that IPM involves a whole set of control measures, and it's not just doing nothing. It's actually managing the crop in a very particular way. So if growers want to do it, try one paddock, and actually rather than a crop type, if a rotation is going through wheat, barley, canola, for example, stick to the same paddock. And that way you build up a population of resident beneficials as well as the things that fly in every season.
Yeah. Okay, that's good advice. So you mentioned that there were companies that sell, the pathogen side of the biological control. There are other companies, of course, that do, rear up, predators and parasitoids and sell them. Just talk me through, is that going to give the grow? I mean, I can understand in a glasshouse situation where using, those and almost, doing a mass release would work. In a open sort of, broad acre situation, are you going to get any added benefits by doing a release of a commercial insect?
I think at the moment, probably not. And the cost would be prohibitive. It's, the production is targeted for particular industries, usually intensive horticulture. But if it was to be used in a broadacre setting, instead of trying to inundate a crop with beneficial species, the other approach is to try and inoculate it. So a small number of species which then breed up in the crop. Yeah. So no one's doing that, and I'm not suggesting that at the moment at all. I think all the things I talked about for broadacre, they're all naturally occurring, and that's what is there to be used. Perhaps in the future, people could buy some parasitic wasps that attack aphids and inoculate a paddock if they wanted to, and that overcomes the lag between the arrival of a pest and the arrival of the beneficials. The beneficials are usually not there before their food. So it is possible in the future that, those things might be available.
But I guess, there is that issue around, doing plantings around your crop of, plants that will attract beneficials or allow beneficials to overwinter. And so there is that strategy to try and always keep the beneficials close by.
Yes. So one of the cultural controls that people can do is to have flowering plants on the fence lines or borders, and that provides a nectar source for beneficial species. Yeah. And so if they get that nectar source, they live longer, they sting more pests.
Yeah. And you just have to know what disadvantages having those plants around might be, because they might also allow the pests to harbour, or they might create, seed contamination issues. So again, it's all of trying to understand, all the interactions that are going on, as opposed to let's just put an insecticide out there and get a sort of a knockdown effect straight away. So it's a challenging space, but if you get it right, it can deliver a much more sustainable system.
Yes, I think so. Very careful use of selective products. Each product may be more expensive than other products that are commonly used, but if they're only used every once or twice every couple of years, those products should last a long time, and the cost to the grower should be much less than a regular spray program.
Okay, so just finishing up, any last words, James, of wisdom that you would like to give the growers?
I think don't be afraid to try it. Most growers that we've talked to are prepared to try on one paddock, try something different, and with the right advice, it's not too risky. And if they see good results, they can expand it to more of their farm.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.